Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Great work, Dr. Isama. I enjoyed the lecture. It was very beautiful and went through it. It was quickly and smooth. And I like these definitions where you differentiated between the maxillofacial prosthetics and prosthesis. This is a big confusion that usually people have. So your differentiation of the terms at the beginning, the very beginning, was beautiful. The historic hints were also beautiful, and the aims of the work was beautiful. The maxillofacial explaining the differences between the maxillofacial defects and their reasons, and in terms of their location. But these are in terms of location, okay? Because you have to have somewhere in where you have mentioned reasons of these defects. So just add here, please, by location, okay? The next classification, this is the one by reason. This is by reason, okay? Or by origin of the defect, or the reason of the defect, okay? You haven't placed a lot about percentages of these defects, yeah. It will be beneficial that, for example, if you're talking about cleft lip and palate, it's good to give the global numbers of each for such treatments. If it was syndromes, you can mention some of these syndromes and give us some information about the percentages of those born with these syndromes or not. Why? Because this will draw the attention of prosthodontists to the idea how much this treatment is needed, meaning that your lecture could guide somebody to decide to become a maxillofacial, prosthetic expert. And this also gives us numbers. Also, what are the numbers for traumas that involve the maxillofacial region that require these maxillofacial prostheses, and also resection surgeries, the percentage of these. So these prevalence data would give us the importance of such specialty and will give us what we're expecting in the future, okay? So it's not only even the numbers at the moment, you could also get numbers as a trend in terms of where are they heading? Are they heading to be increased or decreased and so on? So prevalence numbers here are beautiful to be added. You have designed the classification here very well. The maxillary obturators you talked about. You talked about their production a little bit, but I don't see here any workflow. Okay, I don't say like what step one is so and so, step two, step three, step four. How do you integrate the data from the, for example, CT scan with the actual build-up of the prosthesis? Some of the laboratory work involved with this, I would love to see it. So you could go and give us the conventional method of producing such prostheses, okay? So do make a workflow for the conventional processes that are involved in these obturators, okay? Mandibular resection prostheses, also talking about prostheses that work with the mandible. But there is something about, especially in mandibular cases, if, for example, in this case, you will have base bone that keeps the mandible in its original position. But in such resections, not only the prosthesis is present, you have to talk about a little bit how do they bat the muscles, the jaw opening muscles and jaw closing muscles. How do they stabilize muscles around those prostheses? Okay, because usually when you cut the mandible like this, you will immediately have a shift due to the and it becomes unbalanced, the unbalanced muscle contraction around the area. So how does the prosthesis regain the mandibular morphology? But here, for example, the base is still there. So the mandibular morphology is kept in place by the base bone. But here, you will have this problem where the bone and muscle activity shifts. So how do you restore that using the maxillofacial prosthesis? Okay, once more, a workflow, a conventional workflow for such cases, okay? 3D printing for custom facial prostheses. The addition of 3D printing was beautiful. I loved this work where we talked about 3D printing. And you have talked about the workflow. And I was going to tell you the digital workflow we wanted, but it was presented for this case very beautifully. But the cases after that, it was not clear for the digital work. For example, what I found that in those two cases, the digital work was in the design of the prosthesis, but you haven't talked about the molds, for example. So a negative mold was designed and fabricated with a polyamide by using 3D printer. We're talking about then that the mold was designed by 3D printing. Okay. صح دكتور if I'm correct. Okay.
دكتورة، هو الديزاين للمولد من السكان الميرورد اللي عملوا لها ميرورينج، عملوا المولد يعني الديزاين تبعه، وبعدين
Negative.
عملوا له
Okay.
امبورت 3D برينتر وطبعوا.
Okay, so it's the negative mold, meaning that it's the mold that we pour into it, the rubber material later on when they mix it.
Exactly.
Okay, so see, it's a bit confusing. So if the workflow is present, but if you put it in stages like arrows, and you first process this and then and this, so just to make sure that we are not confused. Okay, so it's, let's say this is the mold that they made by 3D printing, correct? Then they added the silicones inside.
Yes.
Okay, so see, the image showed it, but I mean, if you just place it as a diagram, a flow chart, this is the first step, this is the result. This is the second step, this is the result. So it goes like each step, the name of the step and the result of it, okay? It just could be clearer than the written text here, okay?
Okay, Dr.
Yeah, if you want to follow the text, it's a bit tedious. You will need some effort. But if it was present as a workflow and as a chart, a flow chart, it will be easier for us to understand. Okay, so digital workflow is present, fine enough. Going to the material, the current available material for maxillofacial prosthesis. Now, you name these materials here. But you haven't mentioned in the cases where they are implant retained. Have these materials changed? So this is one thing I want you to check. Are they still using the same material with the implant retained prosthesis or not?
دكتورة، أغلب الفيشيال اكسترا اورال يعني prosthesis استخدموا سيليكون elastomers.
Elastomers, okay. So it's the silicone elastomers. So it's okay because you're talking about the conventional, but add it then later on, because this is where what was beautiful, the advantages, the disadvantages, the silicone elastomers. You've talked about that, but when you talked about the implant retained, you didn't re-mention them, okay? Just re-mention that with implant maxillofacial prosthesis, such and such material are used, okay? You haven't talked as well as about the implants. What are the designs of the implants themselves? The maxillofacial implants. What are their designs, their specifications, their shapes? Try to bring something about that. Let's say it could be easily put like this. What is the difference between maxillofacial prosthesis and intraoral prosthesis or alveolar prosthesis implants? Okay. In terms of that type of the implant, have they changed the material of the implants? Have they changed the design? Have they? Sorry, just a moment.
دكتورة، فهمت عليكي. هم غيروا الديزاين، يعني حطوا زي وينجز هيك عشان يزودوا السيرفيس اريا، وهم احجامهم بتكون اصغر، اللينكس تبعتهم.
Okay, just 1 minute, just 1 minute. Okay, going back to that point, what about the types of the implants, their lengths, any accessories, anything added to them, any specifications? Do they provide or do they apply the immediate loading, or do they do delayed? Do they embed them? Do they do any temporization over them? Whatever related to the implant itself as a procedure, it would be beautifully added here. And the lecture really needs it, okay? You haven't talked about the diagnostic methods used. Okay, how to correlate, for example, do you remember when we were talking about dentures and we were talking about dental implants? There was a way where they integrated the information gained from the CBCT scan into the design of the implants. Do you remember that? And the software in the CAD/CAM design, you don't only take the intraoral scans, you can also go into the CBCT scans. And then from there, you design your implant and your length and so on. So you haven't talked here about what imaging, what diagnostics do they do? Do they apply, sorry, just a minute. What diagnostics did they use in combination with prosthetic work? How do they do the mold, for example? How do they create the immediate surgical guides or the immediate surgical plates? Okay, guiding the treatment or surgical procedure itself during, especially in resection cases. So there are some preparatory procedures that you should talk about, like preparatory diagnostics you should talk about. That will aid this here. Don't dive deep into it. Just like 2 or 3 slides to orient the listener to the procedures accompanying the work as a prosthesis data. Okay. If we go further, implants application, we're talking, okay, the retention systems, you talked about the implant applications as well, you talked about the sites. Here is just a bit more about the surgical procedures in terms of implant placement. For example, talk about some, what do they use, how do they drill into the bone. I love this part where you talked about the implant retention systems around the nose. Okay, these were beautifully done. I loved where you have done comprehensive reviews and systematic analysis. Okay, systematic reviews. This was well located. If you find, while you were sessioning, if you find other systematic reviews, please add them, because the presentation will become much richer by these systematic reviews. And you haven't talked about the teams involved. Okay, add something about the teams. Who are the teams that work with the maxillofacial prosthesis, and how are the roles distributed between them? Okay. We talked about the workflow. Yes, you ended without thank you or anything. Usually we have a final slide, but I have not finished. In terms of maintenance, okay, how are these maintained? You talked about some of the wear and comfort, you talked about the color stability, but there are other stuff that are related to the maintenance of such prostheses in terms of what are the infections occurring around these prostheses. The color change, you talked about it, but what is the time range expecting to change that? How do they disinfect it? How do they remove it? Do they take it out at night? Some of these, adding 1 or 2 slides about how the patient should maintain their prosthesis. Another couple of slides of how the clinician and the technician working with these maxillofacial prosthesis, how do they maintain them? What are the recall periods? What do they do when they recall them? How do they judge that they have been successful or they need repair? Okay, so try to just bring a couple or 3 slides about the maintenance phase. Okay, so this will also add to the strength of your presentation. Thank you very much. The subject is interesting, and I appreciate your work very highly. Thank you very much, Dr. Hassan. Any comments from your colleagues? Any comments from the colleagues?
No, Doctor, everything is clear.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Okay,
يعطيكم العافية.
inshallah. All the best for everyone, and see you later, inshallah. And Dr. Osama, once more, your consent is requested for this slide. This fine presentation. Thank you very much.
كذا يعطيك العافية. سلامات إن شاء الله. سلامات.